A new season of Squid Game has just been released and I saw this really cool intro that I wanted to recreate. You can also use it as a title and I'm gonna show you the exact techniques to make it. So let's jump into After Effects. So I'm here in After Effects. I'm first gonna create a new composition and I'm gonna make this 4K 25 frames per second. The duration, I'm gonna type in maybe like 10 seconds, that should be fine. Let's also set this to 0. Press OK. And now we want to make the background. I'm just gonna go to Layer, New, Solid. And here I can choose a color that I want. And in this case, I'm just gonna click on this and I'm gonna make it a bit of a pink, a nice pink color. And of course you can choose your own color here. I want it to be a bit like off pink, so not fully pink. So something like this should work. And we can of course always change this later. Let's press OK and let's click on the make comp size and then press OK again. And we have this beautiful background. This is not what we want yet, of course. No, I want a texture over this. And I recently found this website. It's called Texture Labs. And it's super nice for some great textures that we can download and put over it. And basically we're looking at something raw, something with a lot of texture. So this could work maybe. Maybe it's a bit too low res. Actually, there's a really high resolution version. So let's try this. We're gonna go for the large. I'm gonna save it in my Squid Games folder. Always important, keep things organized. And let's save that. And the other thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna download this Game of Squids font. You can just search this on Google. Perfect. Let's go back to After Effects and I'm going to import the texture. And you do this by double clicking here on the left. Then you can click on the Texture Labs and let's open this. I'll drag it into my After Effects file. And then we want to change the blending mode. Now to change the blending mode, maybe you don't see it here. You might have to click on the toggle switches modes. And then you should be able to see this mode column. And I'm gonna change this to overlay. I might change it later on, but let's put it to overlay first. And I also noticed that my background is just a bit too light. And if you want to change your background color, you can just select it, go to layer, solid settings, and then we can change the color. And here I can, for example, make it a bit more towards a red tone. So more of a reddish pink instead of pink. And then press OK. That's already cool. And I want to adjust the texture a bit. So I'm just going to go into the texture and I'm going to go to my effects and presets and I will add a levels to this. And let's just double click on that while you have the texture selected. And I also want to add a tint to this just to make sure that it's black and white. I think it already is, but you never know. So let's double click on that too. Then let's make this column a bit more big so we can fully see it. And then what we can do is add a bit of contrast to this. Basically what I want is have these spots be more white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap the colors and I'm going to drag this left side to the right. And as you can see, that will add more texture to it, more texture. We can now press T for transparency and we can dial this texture down so it's a bit less heavy. But another blending mode you can also use is the screen blending mode. This will be a bit of a different look, so you might have to adjust your levels a bit again. It depends a bit on what you want. I'm going to keep it on overlay and I'm going to keep it around these settings. I think this looks quite cool. Now we're going to add our text and that's where the font comes in. So we can just go to the text tool and I'm going to click here and I'm going to type in Tom's project, of course. Then let's select your text and let's go to the text section and I'm going to change this to Game of Squids. And as you can see, we already have this really cool text and I might even put it on a second line. So we have it like this. Let's select all of our text again by hitting Command A on Mac or Control A on Windows. And then I'm going to center this and I'm also going to make sure there's a bit more spacing between this. Also, I need to add the enter at project, not after the P, but after the S. So we have Tom's project. That looks cool. The J is almost aligned, which is cool. We can do something with that. And I'm just going to go to the selection tool in the top left. You can also press V and then we can center this. We can just move it around. But of course, even better is by going to the align tool and then centering it into your composition, just like this. Now we can even press S for scale and scale it up a bit to make it a bit bigger. And that already looks quite cool. Now let's move this layer under our texture. And not much will happen yet because the texture is basically white. So it always is a bit difficult to see. And a good trick around this is by duplicating this layer, then changing the track matte to the text and turning the text back on. And basically what this will do is that this texture that we just created will just be applying it to the text. And by the way, you duplicate by hitting Command D or Control D on Windows. Now I want to adjust this texture that we just created. I want to swap it because that will invert it. And then we have to change the blending mode too. And let's change the blending mode to multiply. And as you can see, this adds a cool texture. Now we might have to change the levels again, maybe dragging this a bit to the left, and the right one, I'm going to drag that a bit more to the left. So there's a bit more contrast between it, maybe even more. And the more you put this together, basically the more contrast you will create. We can go crazy like this, but we don't want that. I want it to be a bit in between, something like this. And as you can see, this looks really cool. Add some texture to the text and makes it blend with the background more. Now, if you want to fill a letter, we can simply just go to the ellipse tool, make sure nothing is selected, and make sure the fill, if we click on this, is set to like a dark, almost black. Press OK. And then click on the word stroke, and let's disable it by clicking on none. Okay, and now, for example, we can fill the O. Let's change the quality to full to fully see this. And make sure that when you drag this out, hold shift while you do it, because otherwise it won't be nice and circular. So we can fill it, we can go to the selection tool and we can move it a bit. And let's also move this down below. As you can see, the texture won't really be applied to the black. And that's because of the blending mode. Again, it always depends on which color you use. So let's see if we can change this to add maybe. And as you can see, that will add way more texture to it. It will also make everything a bit lighter. So I have to adjust it a bit, maybe this one a bit more to the left and this one also a bit more to the left, something like this. And that already looks really, really cool. As you can see, it also adds the texture to the black, which is nice. Now it might be a bit too light, so we can always go into our solid and again go to layer solid settings. Then we can make it a bit darker just to compensate for what we just did. Press OK, press OK. That's cool. And now, of course, you're curious how to animate it. Well, it consists of three things: the text animation, line animation, and a camera movement. And I'm going to go through all three things. Let's start with the text animation. And to animate this text, we need to change it to shapes. So you need to be sure that you're happy with your text. There's no way back after this. So right click on your text, create shapes from text. It will create shapes from your text, surprise. And then we can open this and go into the contents and you can see all the letters separated. And the cool thing is that if we want to animate this T, we can just open the T again and click on the stopwatch. And then we can go a bit further and then we can select this by just dragging and then dragging this down. And the key thing is if you hold shift, it will stay in a straight line. So we can just drag this. And if I now set it to quarter quality, you can do this here to make it a bit more quicker. You can see we already have an animation. And now we can do that with all of the other letters too. And that's cool, but there's also some cool line animations. And let's say, for example, we have a circle. Make sure nothing is selected. Go to the ellipse tool. Make sure the fill is set to none. Okay, and then the stroke, I'm going to click on the stroke text and change that to solid color. Okay, and then I'm going to change the color of the stroke to white, and then maybe the stroke width, which is this in pixels, maybe set that to something like 70 or 60, and we can adjust this later on. Let's now just make a circle and again hold shift while doing so. And then the cool thing is that if we go to the pen tool, we can click here at the bottom and we can hold shift to make a straight line. It will create a line with the exact same stroke width. Now it's not perfectly aligned, get it? So we have to adjust that, and we adjust this by going to the selection tool. And then we can just click on this line and move it down a bit and make sure it's nicely aligned. And now to animate this, we can just go to the add, go to trim paths, and then we can go into this trim paths. And then the key thing is that we can animate this, and we can also animate the circle by adding a trim paths to this ellipse. However, what you can even do is drag this trim paths outside of this. And then when we animate the end, it will animate both, or we can change the trim multiple shapes to individually to also do it. And then of course we can also adjust the offset, which basically will offset where it starts. If we now, for example, change this, you can see that it does this. And that's exactly the effect that they're also using. Now I'm just going to delete this for this title animation. That's not that important. However, for this title animation, a 3D camera movement is important. So I'm also going to show you how to do that. And for that, I'm just going to go to Layer, New, Camera, and make sure it's a 2-node camera. That's important for this effect. And the preset doesn't really matter. You can go for 35 or 50 millimeters, and the enable depth of field needs to be turned on. Press OK and press OK again. Then go to the toggle switches modes and make sure you can see this icon with the cube. And now I'm just going to make everything 3D. Nothing will really change until we press P for the position on the camera and move the second value. And if you hold shift while moving that second value, you already have a cool movement. So we can make it a bit more sideways, something like this. And then we can set a keyframe by clicking on the stopwatch, dragging this to the left, going a bit further, and then just animating it a bit more, something like this. Now, as you can see, it won't fill the whole screen, and that is important. So we need to click on the texture that we created, actually both of our textures, but you can also link one to another, so you only have to change one. And you do this by hitting the parent icon and dragging that to this texture. Then I'm going to press S for scale, and I'm going to scale that up a bit. This will just make sure that it fills the whole screen. It's amazing. I like it. Now I'm going to go into the camera and add shadow depth of field. Because basically in real life, for example here, my hand is more close to the camera, and so it's blurry. We can generate that in After Effects too, and we do that by going into the camera options, and depth of field is already turned on, but we need to up the value of the aperture. So let's up it by a lot to make it nice and blurry. And as you can see, it's now out of focus, and that's because it's not focused on the text. And you can change the focus distance to make your text sharp again. However, what you can also do is you can go to two views, and there you can physically see the focus point. Here you can see this square, and if we change the focus distance, you can also see that it adjusts. And this means if we hold shift, we can move this all the way to our text. And now that we moved it to our text, we can also increase the aperture even more. By doing so, we'll get more shadow depth of field. That's basically the blur at the front and at the back. You don't want to overdo it, because then you can see we will just have the bottom of the J in focus. So in this case, I'm probably going to set it around like 2000. I'm going to adjust the focus distance a bit, and there you have it. Now you know how to make a Squid Game intro in After Effects. Now, if you want to learn even more about editing and you want the project file of this tutorial and all of my other tutorials, then do join the Social Creator Club Pro. Links in the description. You will get access to tons of deep dives on advanced editing techniques, but you also join an amazing editing community full of people that all want to help out. And there's tons of more value inside, so do check that out. Link in the description. Then I want to, of course, say thanks for watching. Thanks for all the support. I'm really, really grateful for you guys. And that I get to be able to do this is amazing. Of course, don't forget to subscribe, and then I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.